Welcome to another episode of Panelism, where we talk comics and culture. I'm Taylor Trask, and with me, as always, the undisputed king of West Coast rap, Todd A.
I didn't know where that was going.
I'm just going to say a different one every time, just to throw you off, just to see.
I appreciate how that was not in the notes.
It just popped out, just flowed out. How are you, sir? How are things in the new year?
I'm pretty good. Just this morning, I was re-listening to our Techtivist episode because, for starters, that's the best sounding episode we've ever done.
Oh.
But I did have that that feeling that I've expressed several times, I think, lately, which is, man, I'm ready to talk comics. Like, I feel like I got all this frustration out. We were just off the chain talking about things we were frustrated with throughout 2021 in technology. And I was like, I'm just ready to jump into some comics. And then right before we start podcasting, I was texting a friend about COVID, which my iPhone forcibly autocorrects to either Coco or Vivid.
What?
And I'm like, it is 2022.
We're 2 years into this. Yeah,
COVID should be a known word on your iPhone. And this is one of those like grievances we had, which is the autocorrect is so forceful in iOS versus Android. Anyway.
So, we're going to talk about.
You and I talked about Coco and Vivid before this kicked off, so we don't need to get into it in the episode here.
But it's a good sort of note because it tees up a lot of what the main conversation is going to be, which is a book called "Not All Robots," and we're going to get into a lot of like just the discussion of humanity's relationship to technology. So there's really good thread back to Techtivist here that we'll get to.
Great way to tie together. Yeah, and I like that we've got an episode where you and I have read the same book. You've read farther ahead than I have, but we haven't done that in a while. So this is cool. Kicking off the new year. Can I kick off the quick hits with this? Because it's maybe a good segue too, which is I traveled over the holidays and I've been locked down ever since. But as we've talked about before, traveling, that forced what do you call it? Like, it's just like, it's not, it's not exactly isolation, but just when you're in the airport, when you're on the plane, whatever it is, just all I have is the iPad. And so what I do is, increasingly is I just use that as time to clear out the TBR pile. Yeah. Like things have been downloaded through Comixology Unlimited for months. And I just sit down and I just read like 5 pages. And if I'm not into it, I'm just whisking it away and it's gone. And I did so much of that, and it actually really helped me focus on what I want to read this upcoming year. And what I felt like was I already have a queue at home of some nonfiction graphic novels and just graphical novels, and it made me so excited to get back and read those because there was so much like fantasy and sci-fi and some superhero stuff that I was going through on the airplanes that I just decided like, I don't need to get into that this year. So it's just that feeling of like, oh, I can't wait to sink my teeth into something, long and real.
So let me ask you this: when you're doing that TBR dwittle down, it's a dangerous line because at one point, for me, it starts to feel more just like, like dutiful homework or like going through your bills in the mail. Like, okay, this one, and there's on one hand, there's a nice efficiency to that because then you're really just truly giving your attention to the stuff that's capturing you in that moment. But at the same time, do you ever feel like, man, I might be rushing this and I may not be giving certain books the right appropriate respect or time, or do you just not even consider that?
Well, I mean, that's been one of the hardest things to get over the past few years, especially since I became a Comixology Unlimited, subscriber. And it's like, well, I can have 50 books checked out at any time. Yeah. So believe me, I have 50 books checked out at all times, because
I've never hit the 50 limit. How the hell do you do this? No,
well,
never.
Because I'm like a completist. So it's I enjoyed the first volume of Dr. Aphra. Oh, they've got all 6 of them? Yeah, I'll download
Here's every
all of
issue of Saga.
Exactly. Yeah, so, one of the things that kind of surprised me, and not that it's a bad book or anything, just that I discovered this isn't the mood I'm in, but I read and loved the book Spera, and you and I talked about it last year, or maybe even in 2020, but I had volumes 2 and 3 on Comixology because I just never like dipped into them. That's the real problem is you and I focus on one book and then I don't do the further reading for pleasure afterward. It's like, nope, the homework's done.
Yeah.
2 and 3 will just sit on the iPad. So anyway, I started reading those and I thought, and that was one of the ones where I was like, you know what? This is not the mood I'm in. And why am I keeping 2 volumes around? Yeah. So I, you know, just returned them and now I got 2 more slots to fill up.
I also kind of just refreshed my thinking a little bit and realized I have to be a bit more discerning because I've got a TBR pile that's some of it's just been literally sitting here a year. And I'm like, okay, it's either it's never going to happen or I just need to like power through and just, if it's not a great book or a great issue, that's fine. Like I have to get back to that place where, you know, I'm really just, I'm not dismissive, but just not devoting any time or energy to like books that just are moderately interesting to me. Like it's got to really capture me. And because there just simply is so much, there is simply too much and I'm never going to get to it. So I need to be really, even things I think are like, oh, this might be interesting. If it just isn't by, you know, the end of the issue 1 or, you know, halfway through, if it's one of those, like, if it's like a Netflix show where somebody's like, yeah, but wait till episode 4, then it really starts to work. I'm like, I'm not wasting 3 hours of my life just to then be maybe happy by the 4th hour. Like, no, if it's not hitting me in the right way, you know, I understand things can evolve and get better, but it's not hooking me right away. I got to move on and maybe I'll come back at another time. You know, there should be another pile, like the ones that got away pile, right? Like Spotify has a playlist that they make for you for this, where it's like, hey, I tried this, didn't hate it, but didn't love it. And that should like go somewhere where, like, you know, if you're ever in a lull, you want to revisit stuff, you just have kind of like a queue that you can go, well, these were books that maybe it's just the wrong place, wrong time. Let's see, you know, and just kind of have that second chance stack or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I mean, that's one of the terrible things about digital consumption is because I just did it like as you were speaking because I wanted to name this book. But once I return a book, it's gone. There's like no trace that I ever checked it out, at least that I've found. Maybe there's a history in Comixology or something. But I think one of the great things that happened was I read a single issue of this book called Sylvania. And I didn't mind it. It's got very like a Lumberjanes kind of feel. It's in that world of Sparrow. There's like some magic happening and it's in the woods. And, you know, it's written for a younger audience and I enjoyed it. But after one issue, I was like, yeah, I'm good. I'm done with that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that always felt like that, you know, that's a healthy impulse. I did get home from my travels and was recommending the book Unnatural to someone. And that caused me to Google it and realize that there is a hardcover omnibus edition. This is a book I've only read digitally. So I immediately ordered that omnibus for myself.
Nice.
And it is like on its way, you know?
Very cool. There's before we get into like the big book discussion, which again is not all robots, but we did watch some stuff too. We're recording this in New Year's or rather January 22. So some stuff came out. We've been talking about sort of in our private group chat. One thing I want to highlight real quick is the live action Cowboy Bebop show on Netflix, which sadly I just learned is not getting renewed for a second season. And it's a damn shame because the thing is amazing. I was only sort of moderately interested in the original anime. I'd never quite really sunk into it. I could see its appeal and a lot of people were really into it. But for some reason, this iteration just really works for me. It's beautiful. Like they care a lot about all the details and the look, and it's very loyal to the anime while still taking some liberties that I think make it better. Here's my pitch. If you basically want to see like Quentin Tarantino direct, like Kingsman, basically, like here's what it would be like. It just has that same kind of flair and style, and just there's a hipness to it that I really, really, really like. And John Cho is amazing. He owns that role now. He's exactly who I'll think of, and it's got camp and it's got, it's very outrageous in that sort of Kingsman Deadpool kind of way. It's got very extreme violence, but very artful and very almost kind of like there's a Wile E. Coyote kind of element to it too, where everybody kind of seems indestructible. But I mean, I'll say this, if you're interested at all, the first couple episodes of a show, the first, I would say 15 minutes of the first episode, if you're not in by then, don't bother, because like that, they really put all their guns on the table, literally speaking. Like in that first 15 minutes, it's like, look, this is the show. This is what it feels like. This is what it looks like. You don't have to wait till episode 4. And it's kind of got a bit of an anthology kind of vibe where every episode kind of stands alone, but there's still an overarching kind of vibe. That's
good to know.
Yeah. And then, it all ties together nicely and sets up what would have been season 2, but you don't feel like you don't feel like, like they do conclude a base story at the end of the season 1. So it doesn't feel like, oh man, we're never going to know.
Right.
Yeah, they tease some stuff, but it's like, it still feels like, okay, well, if they stop here, it's not like Lost where there's all these unanswered questions. Like I can get through it.
Yeah. You had pitched it to me. Not even pitched. I think you just texted and said it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I immediately watched it like that day. I agree with everything you said. I think that Tarantino directs The Kingsman is exactly the vibe that you get. And you're right. Like within 15 minutes, it's set up.
Yeah.
That said, I didn't keep watching it after that first episode.
No.
And
Why not
that I disliked it. I just sort of felt like, man, this is not what I want to watch right now. So
fair enough.
It
makes me
wonder.
Also
felt like something I can come back to.
And that's what I'm wondering, if it doesn't find some legs. Like you get into the spring and especially like in the summer. Like did Netflix screw up by putting it out like during Thanksgiving? Like
it totally got buried, right? I didn't know it was coming. I hadn't heard anything in advance, and then it was just on Netflix one day. And there were a million other things to watch.
Yeah.
But I totally agree. And then my next quick hit is perfectly in line with that, which is The Witcher, which I hadn't watched up until last week, and just sort of sat down and watched. Correct. I had not seen any of it. So I had just approached it like, you know what, it's going to be here. Whenever I'm ready for it, it's here. Mm-hmm. And that was really enjoyable to feel like, yeah, I'm in the mood for this and I'm going to sit down and watch it. And I have people to talk about it with now, which I didn't when it came out. So
now let me tease out a question I asked on our private chat, because I've been aware of it. I'm aware of the game it's based on and all of that. Henry Cavill looks good in it, blah, blah, blah. But I as someone who doesn't really understand, like all I know is what I've seen in the trailers. Yes. And on the odd, Screen Rant article or what have you. But is the pitch that this is kind of Game of Thrones-esque? Does it have, is it like a gritty Game of Thrones, or does it not relate to that stylistically?
But use the other adjective you used in our chat.
What did I say? I forget what I said.
Is this just an emo Game of Thrones?
Yes. That is correct. Yeah. Is it?
Exactly.
It is. Okay. All right.
So I can't speak to season 2 yet because I've only watched 1.5 episodes of that. But
real quick, how many seasons have they put out?
Just 2. So the second one just came out. So that's why it's like top of mind right now. Yeah.
It just feels like it's been around for so long that they'd be beyond that by now.
Guess it was one of those things that came out late 2019 or early 2020 or something. So it feels like it's been more than a year since, in between the first season, I think.
Well, COVID probably shut down production, I'm sure, for a while and all that.
I mean, it does not rise to the level of Game of Thrones it's not as cinematic and the story's not as compelling. It's a little bit, well, not a little bit, it's a lot confusing, especially the first season, as I've learned in retrospect, is that they start out with 2 different timelines running and you're not aware that these 2 different timelines are running until about 6 episodes into it. When something happens that's so incongruous that you're like, well, wait, how have they not met? They met in the first episode. What's going on? And then it takes the 7th and 8th episode to bring it all together. And you realize they sort of told an origin story in parallel with telling the current event story. But they also fall prey to this Game of Thrones thing where they're sort of trying to play up the intrigue and the kingdoms and these different powers of factions that are against each other. And every time they do that, it sucks. Like it should just be an anthology of this creepy monster hunter,
Okay.
Because, and I mean, it could be I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the manga Lone Wolf and Cub, it could be a Lone Wolf and Cub. It could be a Logan,
or a Mandalorian.
Or Mandalorian. Perfect. Yeah. It could be Old Man Witcher, Henry Cavill, and the young girl that he has to protect. And it could just be season after season of what's going on. You don't even need to see the kingdoms. Like there's a huge battle in one, that goes over like the last 2 episodes of the first season. And I'm like, who am I rooting for here? I don't even know what, I don't even like the person that's clearly being telegraphed to me is the good person, I don't even like that person. So whose side am I on here? I don't care. Then it just, the next episode opens, there's just bodies all over this field. And I'm like, I feel nothing. This is not at all like the Battle of the Bastards or something,
Is it because that Henry Cavill's character isn't directly tied into a lot of the other action? He's just sort of around when these things are happening, or does he have a direct role in like the battle that you just saw?
That's definitely a problem. They pull a full Tyrion in season 2 where he just gets knocked out at the beginning of the battle, and this whole battle happens, and then he wakes up, and you're like, well, that sucked. Our main protagonist was just unconscious for the action.
I mean, to be fair, that was a Bilbo Baggins before it was a Tyrion Lannister. That's what happens in The Hobbit. By the way, if you're new to the show and you're interested, we have a little companion show called Wednesday in Westeros. If you want to go and listen to that as you watch Game of Thrones, look for it. Still wherever fine podcasts are found. So check.
Yeah, that's a great plug. We should still go back and do an episode for every episode that we don't have in the catalog.
That's right, because we did start around season 3 or 4, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And we missed a couple. We did some recaps of earlier stuff, but not like episode by episode.
Right.
We've talked a little on private chat about Hawkeye. Have you watched any of that?
I have not watched it.
I will say this. I won't spoil anything. I'll say this much. It is, I would say, the most movie-like of any of the Marvel TV shows on Disney Plus so far. Like, it really does feel like it is a 6-hour movie. So I would highly recommend, if you haven't watched it yet, binge the whole thing in like one big shot, because it's going to flow together really nicely.
Well, now I last heard that about Winter Soldier.
I'm going to revise that. I mean, that still feels cinematic too, for sure. But I think, in hindsight, that one, the episodes do kind of feel, they're not standalone, but they kind of can exist individually. So if you did want to watch 2 and then go to bed, then come back and watch another one,
Gotcha.
Whereas I think with Hawkeye, it just sort of does feel like Marvel's newest Christmas movie. Like it just has, and it's just 6 hours long. It's also just, it's delightful fun. It feels like it's got kind of a 90s sensibility to it in terms of, Home Alone 2 or like Love Actually. Like it has kind of this thing. It's not a rom-com, but it kind of has that little of that. It's just, and it's really small stakes, which I appreciate, because I've been bemoaning for a long time. Marvel just keeps getting more and more insane in terms of the, where they're going, and they need to pull it back to kind of like Iron Man levels if they're believe some of this stuff again. So definitely does that. And it really, it gives Jeremy Renner a lot to do. And Haley, I forget her last name, Statfield, I forget how you pronounce her name. Anyway, she's magnificent. Like she's okay. If this was a pitch for like, well, she's the new Hawkeye, I'm like, then I'm sold, because like it really, she's. I don't know. She really inhabits. It's a different flavor than we've seen in the Marvel universe. So check that out if you've been on the fence. I highly recommend it. I would even rate it higher than Falcon and Winter Soldier, just in terms of its coherence, its intrigue, how it kind of builds very organically, and every moment feels very earned.
You're not the only person who's told me that. So that's all intriguing. I love that you say it's small stakes, and what went through my head was, well, it's got to be because he doesn't have any powers and he just has a bow and arrow. Like,
you know what though? There's a moment later on where like she says that to him, or he said, she said that to him, and she's like, do you know? Because she's upset. The whole idea is that when she was a young girl, she survived the Battle of New York, where Loki and all that stuff. Basically, the first Avengers, like they show it from her perspective, and they show Hawkeye falling down, like literally jumping off a building. It's the scene we see in Avengers, overhead, but she sees it from 3 or 4 blocks away, and she sees this guy jump off this building and shoot, in her words, use a string and a stick to fight back aliens. So by the time, she's like, do you know why I like you? Do you know why I'm a fan of you? It's because you did that. And it's just like, oh man, what an amazing just sort of everything feels very earned. Like nothing feels like they just put it in just cause. Like it all has a wonderfully, you just end it going, this is what I want more from Marvel. Like it does harken back to kind of the the Iron Man or first Thor movie, where just everything kind of feels smaller scale, more intimate. I dig that.
Well, so our last, couple episodes ago, we talked about the first movie we'd seen in theaters. Have you gone back to the theater to see another movie?
We did. Well, I mean, we talked about Dune.
We talked Dune.
And then the week after that, I saw The French Dispatch, that new Wes Anderson movie.
Yeah.
Which,
oh man, I forgot about that.
I loved. I don't like it better than Grand Budapest. I think that's the top of the mountain.
Okay.
I mean, that is a perfect movie, especially I would say perfect Wes Anderson movie. Like you're not going to get any better. But French Dispatch, it definitely has, somewhere around Moonrise Kingdom, he kind of shifted into this like very hyper stylized fairy tale kind of world, where everything was very much a set, set design. And so this fits into that. It's that same kind of vibe, which I really like. That's when I started getting into Wes Anderson, when it's like, ooh, he's really going for the visuals now. So what French Dispatch does that, but it's more of like, I think it's a series of like 4 or 5 vignettes that are all interrelated, but they're definitely their own little stories. And so it has a bit of a different flow, which I loved it. I'll definitely watch it again many times.
And listeners who are paying attention to what time we released this will notice we have not mentioned a giant Marvel movie that came out in theaters, but that's because neither of us has actually seen it. So we will catch up on Spider-Man soon. But. Yeah,
that requires its own episode anyway. I'm guessing. Because there's a lot going on. I do want to finish off this quick hits though with a little note about Matrix Resurrections, because as we've mentioned in the private chat, our friend Drew and I were both very excited for this, and I don't speak for him.
We thought we were going to do. We thought I was going to hand over the reins to Drew, and you two were going to do like a Matrix mega special episode.
And we still might, but it will be but basically a warning, it'll basically be us just like pooping on it the entire time. Like Drew's got his own reasons. I'll let him explain later if we do that. But for me, it's just like, I watched it twice, and a lot of people are in the same boat. Like we watched it, people are like, what'd you think? Well, I need to see it again. And like that right away should have been the first warning. Like if you have to see a movie a second time to know if you like it or not, probably not a good sign. Not saying that can't happen. There's very art house kind of movies that are very, even Donnie Darko, something that's a little light art house, like second, third, fourth, fifth time I watched it, like I liked it better and better and better and better. I'm like, I see what they're doing. This is not that. This is like, and I'm hesitating because this could be a 30-minute rant. Nobody wants that right now, but like, I'll just say this. I saw it twice. I disliked it even more after the second time.
Both times in the theater?
No, both times on HBO Max. I watched it once on HBO Max because I'm like, let me just see. I was actually, my whole thought was I'll watch the first 10 to 15 minutes just to make sure, because, COVID was starting to kick back up again. I'm like, if I go into a theater, I don't want to be, I don't want this to be the last movie I see in theaters for another 8 months. So I'm like, if it's not up to my standards, I'm not going to do it. So like I watched it on HBO Max, I previewed it, and I ended up watching the whole thing because I'm like, literally within the first 15 minutes, my jaw just kept dropping further and further. And I was, you just kept hearing me mutter, what? I'll say this. I won't even get into like the details of the plot or anything. I'll just say this. In the first 15 to 20 minutes, one of the main characters literally says the line, our parent studio Warner Brothers wants us to make a sequel to the Matrix trilogy. End quote. And the second that came out of his mouth, and he's talking to Keanu Reeves when he's saying it, I'm like, I don't give a shit about this movie. Like I don't, what? No. And then on top of that, you get all these people. No, actually it's a smaller contingent. unlike the first movie, which was, and I should say this too, the first Matrix movie I watched in the theaters, kind of at the end of its run. I didn't really like it. And that was a movie that took me another time or two to go, oh, okay, I see. And I think that was primarily because I saw it first after all the hype like blew it out of proportion. And I think I was really bristling against that.
Yeah. Which is a real thing.
Yeah. So like, I think if I'd much like Donnie Darko, if I'd saw Matrix 1 before anybody knew it existed, it probably would have rocked my world. But I think by the time everybody's like, it's God's gift to movies, I was like, is it? And I kind of went in with my arms crossed. Whereas with this, I don't see a lot of people really celebrating it. Like, it's kind of come and gone with, and I don't hear much about it right now. It could be for a variety of reasons, but like, if it was going to be the Matrix movie to save us all, or like everybody sort of had their own pet idea of like, oh, this is gonna be the sequel we needed. That's what I was saying, or this is gonna really take the philosophy to a new angle. None of that happened. This is like, it's in people. There's a contingent of fanboys who are like, oh, but it's so meta and clever. I'm like, it isn't. It has nothing like. Inception was kind of meta and clever, and that even strained the definition. But this is just bad. The fight sequencing is bad. The cinematography is bad. None of the characters know why they're there. I don't know what anybody wants. I could not tell you the plot. I can tell you the themes, but I could not tell you the plot after watching it 2 times. And themes don't make a movie. Like, if this was going to be just a themey kind of, Paul Thomas Anderson kind of fever dream or something, that's a different movie than what they gave us. It's just like it's like the studio gave it to somebody who saw The Matrix once like 20 years ago and was like, yeah, okay. And which is bizarre because one of the Wachowskis actually wrote and directed it. And I think truthfully, they did it on almost like a dare. Like, we'll make one so bad that Warner Brothers regrets asking us, for the 90th time. So
what was there drama behind Lily Wachowski not joining this movie?
No,
like, it's just Lana.
No drama whatsoever. She just didn't want to do it. They both lost their parents, like I think like 2 years ago. So that's pretty fresh. And she was just like, I don't want to. And so the other one's like, all right, well, I'll do it, but I'm going to do it in a mocky kind of way so that Warner Brothers like literally like the carte blanche she must have had. Because it just, none of it makes any sense. It's so stupid. And I'll say this, in 2022, if you're going to tell a story about humanity's relationship to technology, which is what The Matrix is, you got to try a hell of a lot harder than this. Like, when the first one came out, we didn't really have a lot. We had Blade Runner, we had Lawnmower Man, we had Johnny Mnemonic, strangely enough, another Keanu Reeves movie. Maybe 1 or 2 other things, but that was kind of it. 2001, Space Odyssey, obviously, but there wasn't really this whole buffet of social commentary on technology and humanity until The Matrix 1 came out and like defined that genre forever. And so all these amazing books and comics and other IP came out after that. So if you're going to go then as the originator, as sort of like the gold standard of that genre, if you're going to go and be like, hey, we're going to tell another story about technology and humanity and how the two relate and how they need each other, like you have to then set the bar so far ahead that everybody else feels like they're behind. Like, you have to jump ahead again. And this, this feels like a derivative product in every way, shape. I don't understand. So if you're on the fence about the Matrix or Matrix Resurrections, a hard pass from me, because there's better ways to better uses of your time, and just watch the first one and pretend that no other movies exist, and you'll be fine.
Well, from that we can move into another discussion of humanity's relationship to technology, which is this book we just read called Not All Robots. Not All Robots.
And oh my God, this kind of came out of nowhere and is just delightful. Give us the details and then we'll chat.
Sure. Written by Mark Russell, totally unaware of his career. Art by Mike Deodato Jr. Also not a name I'm familiar with. Colored by Lee Lowridge. And then this I didn't know till you put it in the notes, but the covers were done by an artist named Rahzzah.
Yep.
And that for whatever reason just sort of like passed over me. But and honestly, because I read them digitally, I think, and I did that thing of just sort of swiping past the cover. But they are great. Like
they're really cool. They're very collectible. They're more graphic art than they are comics covers, which I always am a sucker for. Yeah, and I always want to shout out when there's a cover artist who does work at that level. I always want to shout them out too. So props to Rahzzah for really going for it.
Yeah, and I think I got more to say about the art when we get into it for sure. The publisher, again, didn't know this, AWA Studios.
Yeah.
So I had left a question. We have a loose notes document. I had left this question for you because I didn't actually know how many issues were out, but you informed me that there are 5 issues out right now. Mm-hmm. And I had read the first 2 on Comixology. Have you read all 5 now?
No, I've read 3.
Okay.
And so, the first 2 are free on Comixology right now.
Yeah.
If you want to test it out. And also the first issue I learned while we were sort of setting up was also free on a thing called Global Comics, GLOBALCOMIX, Global Comics. This is actually linked from the AWA website. So this isn't like some kind of rogue thing. This is like they were promoting this. It's right there. Like you don't have to even create an account or anything. You just preview it, read it, whatever you want to do. I didn't know Global Comics was even a thing, so I'm going to check that out as soon as we're done chatting. Like it looks like a whole new thing that might be an interesting source of new books.
Well, hit us with the back of the book description.
Yeah. So I'll just read it word for word. In the year 2056, robots have replaced human beings in the workforce. An easy coexistence develops between the newly intelligent robots and the 10 billion humans living on Earth. So we've got 34 years to add a couple billion more people. Every human family is assigned a robot upon whom they are completely reliant. What could possibly go wrong? Meet the Walters, a human family whose robot, Razorball, real name, ominously spends his free time in the garage working on machines which they're pretty sure are designed to kill them in this sci-fi satire from Mark Russell and Mike Deodato. Can I pronounce his name?
Know. I said
Deodato Jr.
It's Deodato, yeah.
Now, a couple of things about Mark Russell that you might find interesting. He's the writer on this. He has also written the Flintstones series, which I haven't read, but I hear is really good.
Really?
And,
okay.
Yeah. More important, and I just realized this just now, he also wrote Second Coming, which is this amazing little indie series on Ahoy Comics about Jesus coming back to Earth and basically interacting with that Earth's version of Superman. And it's kind of like a buddy comic. It's amazing, and it was banned from a lot of like libraries and things. So of course I was like, well, I'm gonna grab this. So if you're we'll talk about Second Coming on another episode, I'm sure, but it's fantastic. So I should have known the guy who wrote that is going to bring some heavy hitting writing to a series like this, which he totally does.
Yeah, I wanted to jump back as we started to talk about first impressions to that cover art, because as I flipped to it to remind myself of what it was, the first impression I got was it looks like the Vision series. Yeah. That was what really stuck out, which we were both fans of. And then when you get into it, it is very much like a CMYK comic style. Like, it almost looks like, hey, there's only the 4 colors, and they do the halftone, like I want to call it stippling, but I'm not sure if that's exactly right. But the dots in there for shading. Yeah. And for whatever reason, this is like the evolution of Todd and Taylor. I just really loved the way the texture of this looked on Comixology. Yeah. Like they're getting to that point where there was a problem in comics. I remember, when I tried to get into comics before we started doing the podcast, when I was trying to get back to them, where they were turning to digital art and digital production more, but Comixology wasn't a thing and they hadn't worked out what it would look like. It was just that physical comics looked fake to me in a weird way. Like it just looked like it was laser jet printed. There was no texture to the images in it, and I hated it. I could not get into it. And we're, finally getting to this place where I'm like, oh my gosh, I love the way this looks, and just having all the light from the screen light it up. It looked great.
It really did. Yeah. No, this is we praise Comixology a lot on this thing, but I mean, there are use cases like this. That's like, no, they really figured out that, I don't know how many people think about like something as subtle as how much light is being pushed through a graphical image on your e-reader or on your tablet, like, and that actually changes your relationship with that works. And so like they really dial that in on this one, for sure. Cause there's certain scenes, like I'm looking at a couple panels where like a guy is sitting in a darkened office and the only light is the light from his computer monitor, and so there's a nice glow to it because it's on a laptop screen. You get this kind of extra glow that kind of brings it to life that you wouldn't get necessarily in a physical book. But it's beautiful it's beautiful art. So I would imagine when this thing comes out in a trade paperback or a hardcover, whatever edition, I will probably grab it there too, because it is definitely going to be a shelf worthy book for me.
So jumping into the story, you read the back of the book, but as that hinted, this is a cutting satire.
Yes.
And I did you read the statement from Mark at the end of the book?
I did, yeah, and that because I had this assumption. I'm like, this seems like it's a lot of things. I wonder how intentional that is. And he's like, oh, it's very intentional.
Yeah, I love that too. So Mark Russell wrote an essay at the end. I think the artist Dan, whose name we keep butchering, Deodato, also wrote one. I think that was he who did the next one. But his is more about the work on Mike Deodato. So it is an exploration, a satiric exploration of toxic masculinity through this future dystopia thing. And I had that same impression you just said, which was like, as you're reading it, you're like, this seems like it's a lot of things. How much is intentional? And to me, it was one of those things where once I learned how intentional it was, I enjoyed it that much more.
Yeah. Let's talk more about that in a second, because there's more political commentary and philosophy that gets baked into this. But like, the overview of just some story beats. Like we said, humanity has created robots. It's the sort of the thing that really hooked me was that I could easily see this, aside from the 10 billion people, which I don't think we'll hit, but like, I could easily see this being reality in 34 years, like easily. So humanity has created robots to do more and more labor. Eventually, every human family is assigned a robot to basically earn a living for that family.
And so I like the twist of that. It's not like, here's your Roomba that will do your vacuuming and cleaning for you. It's, you're no longer needed in the workforce. So we assign you a robot to actually go earn money for your family.
Because all the jobs you would do, the only job humans still do is like hairdresser, because robots keep killing people. And so they're like, okay, we still need human hairdressers, but otherwise robots are doing everything. And so there's always that like, question of, if we do that in our real society, like, well, what will humans do? And then there's that utopic idea of like, well, they'll have more time to pursue their interests and their leisure and their arts and their crafts and blah, 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 blah. And for some that's true, but like, this really kind of kicks up this reality of like, humans kind of feel useless when robots are kind of doing everything. So then you get at the same time, this is a world where what we're experiencing right now is taken to its logical conclusion, where like climate change has happened. There's fires everywhere constantly. Pollution's terrible. Like civil unrest is terrible. You got roving bands of like, militias and things out in the wilderness. So all the cities that still exist have been covered in domes because of the toxicity of the air outside and all the other dangerous aspects. So you've got like these cities like Orlando is in a big dome and Atlanta is in a big dome, which becomes a very key plot point at some point. I don't want to spoil that necessarily, because it was sort of shocking when it happened. It happens in issue one, I believe.
It's so the cliffhanger.
You get to it, but it's like, oh my God. But it has something to do with the way the domes work and like,
and because of course robots do all the maintenance on those domes.
Yeah.
And there's this, and then the artist Mike in his essay points this out, but Mark Russell does such a good way of introducing all of this in like 5 pages.
Yes. And oh my God, the efficiency is amazing.
Yeah. One of the coolest things is that the way you find out about the robots earning the living for the family is that you see this human family sit down to dinner, and the father, Donnie, is saying grace.
Yeah.
And he's thanking this God for the protein globules that they're about to eat. And thank you for Razorball, our housebot, without whom this feast would not be possible.
Yeah.
And that just in this, moment, then it causes this like sort of fight between the family. So the exposition comes out in the fight, like, well, he makes all the money. Shouldn't we thank him? But it also sets up this other dynamic, which is that the father of this family is basically, and I hate to say this because it just doesn't feel right, but he's almost playing the 50s and before, the pre-women's lib housewife who's defending the father, who the father's like harsh treatment of his children. So Donnie is gaslighting his family to how terrible this robot is, because like he's on his side. He watches the news chat shows and he's like, oh, Slicetron makes a good point here, but it's all like anti-human points.
Okay, so one of the things for me, maybe the biggest thing for me, the biggest appeal of this book is how much political and philosophical commentary they bake into it, and relevant contemporary themes that like we are seeing play out in our day-to-day lives right now over the past 2 to 3 years. Like they're all present in this book, only in the, obviously in the timeline of the book, it's, 2058, I believe, 2060, something like that. So the near future, and just it's, the commentary on the times in which we're living, and then just the idea that those themes will probably repeat again, just with, different technology. The whole thing is really captivating in that way. Did you have a similar experience?
It was almost too easy to read the robots and think of our recent Tectivus episode where I'm complaining about the automation in my, phone software.
Yeah.
It's just, I would see this thing and go like, oh no, I voiced that exact same complaint, but take out the word Razorball and put in iOS. Yeah.
Oh, well, it's interesting. We talked earlier about the fact that the robots themselves are very utilitarian looking. Yes. At the beginning of the book, there's a plot point that might shift as the story goes on. They're developing newer, more interesting, more relatable robots.
But I don't think is a spoilery thing for us to mention that becomes a big through line from about halfway through that this new line is they're called mandroids, and they look like they are androids in that way of like they resemble humans.
Yeah, they're like Data from Star Trek. They look
exactly, and it is precisely because they want to soften their image because of they're worried about these glitch rates that are happening, and just people beginning to distrust their technology, which is an exact parallel to things that we go through all the time. Like that, I mean, that's giving Siri different voices you can choose from to feel more, personality or whatever. Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned that because I have a series of Google Home devices or Google Minis in my home, and it has, for some reason, I think since I've gotten an iPhone, Apple or Google has the algorithm just doesn't work as well for me. I've gotten frustrated with it, and I actually did change the voice to a much more like kind, Indian woman's voice recently, just because I was getting so pissed at it.
You're not as likely to yell at a woman or something like that. Yeah. It's like this psychological thing of like, if Google has a man's voice, you're fine with just screaming at it.
Yeah. Or if it has like if the cadence is much more robotic, doesn't have a human intonation. Right. Which is, the movie Her, speaking, kind of a quick tangent, the movie Her, the Spike Jonze movie Her with Scarlett Johansson, Joaquin Phoenix. Like, one of the most interesting things about that is that it's a disembodied AI, but the voice and the personality is so distinctly human. Right. Joaquin Phoenix falls in love with it, and as do many people fall in love with their AIs. Yeah. So this book, there's a couple categories of allegory here, right? And I'll kind of do a broad stroke, and we can dive into each one. So on one hand, you have a biting critique of America's current economy, and kind of our idea of race to the bottom capitalism, where just the more we can automate, the more efficiency we can eke out of it. That's all good. Don't question it. Just kind of everybody kind of chases that, without any regard to how it disrupts, people's livelihoods, their sense of purpose, etc. Another big theme is just the transition to automation, kind of Andrew Yang's nightmare, like the thing that he's built his whole campaign on is just this idea that we're rushing headfirst into automation without any regard to what that means, how that happens, what the side effects are. Probably the most overt metaphor.
Well, let me jump in there, because I think this sounds impossible to do in a book, and it would be so boring in a work of fiction, especially like a comic book where you can't have a lot of just panels of exposition. So to actually critique that whole part of capitalism is that's like an impossible task.
Yeah.
And the way they do it, he handles it in just this real subtle way where they don't have to go into how do I want to say this? Like, they're not having to go into the finances of the whole thing, but obviously they hit a point where everything's going to be so automated in this world and I think we touched on this before, that the humans can no longer earn a living for themselves.
Yeah.
So their solution is just assign a robot to every human household, and that is the breadwinner. Yep. And so in that way, they sort of, that just saying like it's the breadwinner sort of sidesteps having to make all these complicated arguments. But then in a way, it's like, I just think that's brilliant, because it's you see from like, questions that say, for example, Andrew Yang raises, you're thinking like, okay, well, what's your solution? How do you get through this? Because it just sounds like you're just gonna have to have a bunch of slideshows and presentations to explain to us like how to fix capitalism. And in this book, they just say like, yeah, that's how we're gonna fix it.
Yeah. Other kind of big buckets of allegory. There's the protest movement, whether it be Black Lives Matter and just the reaction to that, even like the Capitol, the January 6th riots, there's so much that touches on why people protest and how they organize and how they respond to certain conditions that have been imposed upon them. Probably, though, the most overt metaphor, maybe we can start by really diving into this. The most overt metaphor is just, this whole thing is kind of a satire, not even kind of, is intentionally a satire for toxic masculinity.
Right.
The author says as much in one of the, kind of one of the issues at the, the back of the book.
Yeah,
kind of
the author
commentaries.
statement at the end of that first issue, yeah.
Yeah, so it was conceived. I think the through line of this series was conceived with that in mind, and then organically it kind of branches out into all these other themes we're talking about, specifically on the human technology relationship side, like our dependence on it, our relationship to it, our fear of it. And so, but that toxic masculinity line is goes all the way through. And because now we've read all the issues, at first I thought that might have been something they would set up and then maybe drift away from in favor of some of these other things. And they don't. They really stick with it till the end. They keep, they definitely give attention and thought to all these other things we're talking about. But that through line of, the white man down on his luck, not knowing his place in the world, having sort of had this experience of having everything given to them or feeling like they're important and having that taken away. The first thing that came to my mind, I don't know if you've read this, there's this amazing Hunter S. Thompson article from the 70s. It's like one of his big claims to fame.
I know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. He embedded himself with the Hells Angels and for a period of time and wrote this amazing, I forget which magazine, or maybe it was Rolling Stone, wrote this amazing expose on the Hells Angels. I encourage everybody to go read it because it's just great writing. Hunter S. Thompson's brilliant. But the thing that really struck me about that article was that the Hells Angels, everybody has this misconception of why they formed. Largely, they were a group of guys who went overseas to fight in World War II, did their thing, came back, and the country had kind of moved on. Think about World War II. Like, we automated, factories kind of because of necessity, because we were losing so many guys from that workforce. We had to create new methods of automation. We had to bring in new people, mostly women, into the workforce. All these things had changed kind of the use, where you were in terms of your use in the world and where you valued your labor and all that stuff. Where you were before you went to war, when you came back, very different for a lot of guys. And they kind of, this was an early version of what we're seeing a lot right now, which is this group of people didn't know where they fit in, didn't know, kind of felt like, look, we did this thing, we came back and we don't have anything anymore. We don't have a purpose. And a sense of rebellion formed this biker gang and that evolved to become the Hells Angels we know today. But that was the genesis of it. It was these disillusioned guys didn't feel they had a home anymore, didn't have a place. And then in the kind of the camaraderie, they found each other through, this is pre-internet, they found each other and created this group. There's a group of robots in this book and in the series Not All Robots that is very similar. As I was reading through that part and seeing how these robots kind of find each other and are inspired by this, I'm like, wow, that really does connect to that theme of like, you take a group of people and you very quickly disassociate them for where they find value in their lives and don't give them options. This is what happens. I don't know if you picked up on that, but how did you take all of that?
Well, I think and again, like, not to sound too grandiose, this book restored my faith in fiction. And I think
it's a statement.
Over the last 6 years, it's been so hard to read any fiction that puts you in some alternate history context, because in a lot of ways, I feel like, but we entered that alternate history in 2015. And I think, like, it's and this is certainly an argument to be made, but the sort of rise of Trumpism is a rise of like bad faith politics.
Yes.
For our entire lives, Republicans told us who they were and what they supported, and then all of a sudden they voted in mass for this man that like clearly did not represent or support any of those values.
Yep.
And there's this. There's an easy way out, which is just to say like, oh, those people are stupid or they were duped or whatever. But we know underneath that there's this real anger. And so there's a real importance in like pulling that apart and saying like, why were they angry? Like, just like the Hells Angels, why were they angry? Why were they disenfranchised? And again, like, just an impossible quest for a comic book to explain. And I think one of the ways, and I'm really just like coming to this as you were describing what's exactly going on in the book, is one of the methods he uses to describe that is he doesn't get too mired in the personal stories.
Yes.
Like, it's not that we don't feel for the humans, but and it's also not like and I'm sorry, I don't mean this as a critique for this author, but it's not in a Neil Gaiman way of like where we have representative people. There's not like overlord robot who's like just representative of this one class of robot, and then like underling human who's representative of this other thing. It's just that we're getting a much more like snapshot view of everything. It's like cut to the home and the family having their dinner table conversation, cut to the robot's workplace and the two robots talking about what they, read online, cut to the, the ruling council and what they're planning for the mandroids. And it's those sort of cut scenes that make you, maybe this is a stretch, but maybe it felt a little documentary-esque. Of like, we're just seeing the scenes of this and we're able to put the pieces together in our head. Mark Russell doesn't have to hit us over the head with, get it? This is what this means. It's like, you just see it and you're like, and what he says in that author statement in the first issue is absolutely right. Like, when people have lived in a sense of privilege, like when they have to look at their privilege, it's like they don't even understand it. Like, so he was trying to cast it in a different view. And I just think that conceit worked so well through this whole thing. So I think it really is like, it's not like it's trying to explain that anger behind movements like this, like white nationalist movements or January 6th or whatever. It's not like trying to explain that. It's just trying to show you the snapshots and like what led to that.
Yeah.
So it's like, all these robots, all of a sudden the mandroids come out and all the industrial looking robots get fired.
Yeah.
So of course they're angry,
Very unceremoniously. And even more, and the insult to injury is they get fired and then no one knows what to do with them because like,
right.
to your point, we're given like a specific family and their robot to kind of hinge on, but it's not like we spent all this time knowing every detail about their life. They're almost like a stand-in for any family that could exist. You know, we get a specific snapshot, but it's less, you know, who the mom and dad are as people is less important than like, look, this is the situation on the ground. Like I like your point, that almost like a documentary kind of feeling to it. But the insult to injury is these robots get fired, and then the families who own them, they can't sell them because they're not used. It's like trying to sell an old a laptop from 2010. It's like, who wants this now? So just you have these robots who have sentience, who have, you know, feelings to a large degree, who are now, you know, not only are they obsolete in the sort of, you know, they're obsolete in every sense, right? Like they lost their jobs, and now there's literally nothing for them to do. And the family, you know, is more, you know, the family has replaced them. You know, a lot of these families have gotten mandroids in now. So they just have this like quote unquote hunk of junk that's sitting there that still has, you know, processing power and has a life. And so, they don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. And that's a pretty important, and without spoiling too much, that's a pretty important flashpoint. Like the firing of the robots really does shift the energy in the latter part of the series, and just you get to see kind of where that plays out.
And you know, I mean, one of the difficulties of our podcast in trying to talk about graphic novels, that for starters, I think we've said it over the last couple of years, like in some ways the graphic novel has become like the ideal medium to tell stories about this moment. Like it's, you know, it's both visual, it's graphic design, it's, you know, but it's also, you and I have this funny conundrum when we do our episodes, which is like, how do you describe like how cool a thing is without being like, well, it's just cool, go look at it. But all of this description that we're doing sounds really joyless and humorless for sure. And there is, for starters, the robot talk show where there's a robot host, a robot commentator, and then a token human,
like a cable news talk show,
right?
Yeah,
like a panel show. It's like as soon as you see that, yes, it's a great way to deliver exposition, but you realize like, oh, it's going to cut back to this sort of for like, you know, laughs or whatever. But something else happens at the end of issue 3 when the neighbor gets his mandroid that I was laughing so much reading those final panels of this issue. And then, you know, we said at the outset of this episode that I had read 2 issues and you had read 3. And then what happened was, in our little glitch in the middle, we ended up like completing the series, both of us. Yep. And that it's just orchestrated so well, because you're like, oh, there's this like serious narrative and we're cutting to these protest scenes and like, you know, just getting like a real like heavy dose of you know, civics in it. And then all of a sudden it's like this scene with this new mandroid happens across the street, and like the jealousy between these two men, you know, like the family man we've been watching, who's basically been cuckolded by his robot, you know, goes across the street to meet his neighbor. And then this event, I mean, it's just like, there's this reveal that's so funny. And like, I'm trying so hard not to spoil it, but it is, I was just laughing so hard, and it's like, I have to read the next one right now.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad we did it with this timing. And it's not to get off track here, but it's another thing, a theme we've brought up, I think, before, which is, if I had been reading this issue by issue, yes, I would have wanted to go on immediately, you know, with that next issue. And if I had to wait a couple weeks or a month or whatever for it to come out, it's not that it would diminish it, but it was so gratifying to be able to read the whole thing, you know, in two sittings. I read the first 2 issues.
100%. Yeah.
We started recording, then I read the next 3 issues, and we're finishing recording. But if it had come out simply as a graphic novel, I would have been less tempted to pick it up, because one of the gateways to getting into this was, you said, just download the first issue. It's on unlimited Comixology. So I was like, oh, easy. I can just dip my toes in it and I'll get the theme, see if I like it. And then I, you know, ended up buying the series. So, and this is one I will buy in hardback, I think, and put on my shelf.
I was just going to say that. Yeah. This is the best books. That should be one of our top tests. Is if you acquired this digitally, would you then go and repurchase it physically to have both the artifact, but then just the art is so good that I kind of want it. I want it in that physical sense too. It's just almost like a well done.
It is the perfect comic book in that, for me. I mean, speaking in a personal opinion sort of way, where I like the art and I like the story, and then I like the whole unit of it. I don't want a volume 2. I mean, maybe there's some way to continue the success of this, but to me, this just in a capsule is perfect. Let me put that on my shelf. I will reread that. So.
I don't want there to be a volume 2. We mentioned earlier on in the episode, Mark Russell wrote this, and he also wrote that other amazing series. I just forgot the name of it. Oh my God.
Oh shoot, I did too.
It's the Jesus one.
Second Coming.
Second Coming, yes.
Yeah.
And Second Coming, could also have a sequel series that was meant to be a limited series too. I hope it doesn't. He's the kind of creator where I'm like, no, one and done. Just keep giving me new things, limited series, one and dones. You don't need to go on and on like Hickman does. You can. It's almost like it's almost like he's where Hickman started, where it's just I have a really interesting idea. Here it is. Now I'm moving on to the next one. And Hickman just kind of got caught up in the franchise building of it all.
What is this? This is probably one of those things where anytime that theme comes up, one of us makes this comment I'm about to make, and then we don't actually do that episode. But the comment I was going to make was, man, we could do a whole episode on when series should stop.
And because the one that jumped
right to my mind was Black Science, where I thought it's got all those great ideas packed into it, and the first 3 volumes of it move by at action movie pace, and then it just gets lost, and it's oh dude. And again, a ton of caveats because I haven't finished reading it, and we have on good word it's worth the finishing of it. It ends in a good place, but it's Hickman-esque in that sort of way. And it's funny, when I said you can't cram a bunch of exposition into a comic book, I immediately thought of Hickman, the way he'll just do huge graphic design pages, with exposition that you don't necessarily understand. It's just sort of like a scroll on a movie screen that you have to go back to read.
A long interview. It's you have a panel of 2 people talking, and then it's and here's their transcript of what they said. And it's it just goes on and on and on. Which I don't mind that, but he relies on it too much. And to your point, the genius of Not All Robots is that it definitely is show not tell throughout the whole thing. There's panels where you can glean 4 or 5 different ideas from just a single panel. Hey, the reality is these 2 characters are talking, and they're talking about this specific thing, and that's important to the story. But at the same time, that reminds me of this other thing that occurred last year in the real world, and then there's this theme. For me, you had talked about you'd mentioned it's perfect. It's a perfect book for you because it satiates all of those check boxes. It's a complete picture. It's the art's great, all that. For me, the missing kind of the sweet spot for me is it's a book that uses contemporary news or topical things going on in the real world and does it's not based on the current time and place, so it does something extraordinary. It either puts it in a fantasy world or in a future state like it does here, and kind of talks about that, but almost does it in a clever way where you're ooh, that's contemporary. I have an emotional connection to that because it's here and now. But then they use that almost as a gateway drug to sideload all of these questions, these deeper philosophical questions that could apply to any age. So for me, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I love that. You're exactly what you said. And it lets you sort of take your brain out of the moment. Yeah. But so you can retain an emotional connection to the work and to your contemporary time, but you're not reading something that is specifically commentating on what we're going through. And I just thought of a great example of that as you were saying that. That's why I interrupted. Is remember in the first Dark Knight series, The Dark Knight Returns, there was this commentary on running through it on the arms race, and Superman had become just this sort of puppet of America and everything it stood for, and they kept cutting to the talking heads, which was I think that was sort of one of the big shocking things about The Dark Knight was there would just be these like panels of like all the talking heads on news shows, but they would often show a president that I don't think was named, but it was always clearly like a caricature of Ronald Reagan.
Yep.
You know, and nothing in this book has any connection to that. They don't talk about iPhones. They don't talk about Tim Apple. They don't talk about like the president of the United States. You know, so you're not constantly getting pulled out of your imagination to like think that this is an alternate history kind of thing. You're just like you're fully experiencing the world that it's in, and rather than being like constantly reminded it's your world or something. And I think that makes it so much more effective.
That, by the way, is the true test of good satire or good allegory. You know, like good allegory is that comment on a thing, make me really consider an idea or a proposition, but don't tie it so specifically to, you have to keep it in the abstract enough where I don't feel where like my current programming doesn't get in the way of considering the thing you're trying to tell me. So it's like, if this was, and I struggle with saying that because, we spent a lot of time talking about the 3 graphic novels March, 2 years ago, which all about the John Lewis story, which is amazing and just an amazing historical artifact, just in itself. And you're considering things, but you can almost make the argument that like, because that they're talking, it's almost like the opposite of Not All Robots. It's, we're talking about this real thing that happened, but it's in the past. So it's not right. You can still think about how does racism work in America today, but through this other lens that we're giving it to you. We're not, this isn't a story about, disillusioned white men here and now. And his name is John Jones. And it's like, no, it's just boom. It's this mechanism to get you to really consider ideas in a way that doesn't personalize it so much that you're distracted at any given time.
I mean, in that way, it's almost an Animal Farm, except that in Animal Farm, the pig was named Napoleon.
Boom.
It's like you couldn't even get away from it. But which is a thing that you hear all the time, but it's like that's a comparison people make to great allegories, like, oh, like Animal Farm, but so rarely does it like rise to that level, I think. Exactly. Yeah, this also may sound too grandiose, but I also, at the beginning of our episode, I previewed that I just gotten a hard cover omnibus of Unnatural, and then when we had our glitch, over those 2 days, I sat down and read the whole thing. And so the grandiose part might be the balance in a comic book like this might be more like poetry, where you're trying to put the ideas out there and say the thing in a lyrical way without all the heavy exposition. And I think most people writing, and I don't think there's anything wrong with this, approach a comic book as like a movie script that you're going to draw. So Unnatural, I mean, I love that book, and it has beautiful artwork, and I really think it's like Mirka Andolfo's like, a crowning achievement that she's done. I think it's just so good. But it plays out like a movie, and having read it in between reading Not All Robots was like, Not All Robots, it's like you don't get lost, you're not following the individual paths of these people's lives. You're not getting into all that backstory and exposition because he's not approaching it like it's a movie. It's like, no, you couldn't tell this as a movie, I don't think, without people questioning all the, what does this represent? Or like, do we put iPhones in it? Or like, what about this corporate sponsorship that we've got to slip into the movie somehow, It just exists like a poem, and it's just got so many stanzas and then it's done. And so that's another reason why I hope it just wraps.
You may have just unlocked something we haven't really considered before, which is the kinds of books I really tend to go for are exactly that. They're more graphic novels as poetry than they are, at the same time though, there are also, I also acknowledge and like a lot of the movie screenplay books. We've talked about a bunch of, Postal comes to mind. Postal is a storyboard as a comic, and it functions very, very, it's the best TV show they haven't produced, right? And it happens to exist in a graphic novel form, and it's brilliant, but it's a different sort of thing than, I think the books I come back to and reread are the lyrical ones, are the ones you just laid out very, very, very articulately. you know, and I'll give a quick name check. The book that I always come back to that is, for me, the height of this is Jim Henson's A Tale of Sand, which, you know, it has just a very few dialogue bubbles, and most of it is almost like a silent movie it's a surrealist poem, but you can glean so much from it again and again and again. I do want to talk, before we run out of time, I want to talk, we can spend a whole hour talking about all the philosophical elements. You know, there's only
I think
5.
we've touched on a lot, but yeah,
we have. There's only 5 issues, and yet you can mine so much out of these issues. It's crazy. But the one thing that, like, I think that really that haunts me, having, you know, read and now completed the series, the thing that haunts me more than anything else is the false sense of inevitability that humans seem to have in relationship to tech. This idea that, like, you know, you really kind of see that manifest in issue 3. But because you have some lines where they're just like, well, everybody's getting everybody got a robot, so we just all got a robot. You know, it's like everybody moved into these bubble cities, so that's just what we did because everybody was doing it. And the thing that immediately came to mind was just this idea of, like, all these people, my friend group, who are still on Facebook, who desperately want to leave, but they're like, well, everybody's on Facebook. I'm like, but you can leave. Like, you can choose not to have, like, just because this technology is convenient and easy or cheap doesn't mean you have to. Like, we don't, so much of the last 10 years in terms of Western society, I'll focus on Western society and technology, has just been this runaway, like, inevitability. Like, well, it's out there. We all have to use it, I guess. It's just where we are. And nobody's, like, stopping to think and go, okay, if we use this, what are the side effects? What are the knock-on effects? Like, just like we think about with drugs, like, if we use this drug or implement this medical procedure, what are we not anticipating? And we still, as a society, as a culture, have not really reckoned with that yet. Like, we don't introduce new technologies and go, okay, now if this, then what? We just sort of all pile in, and we're seeing it again now with NFTs and crypto and blockchain, which I'm largely in support of, but, like, there's a huge faction of the current economy that's just, like, blindly running into that minefield. And I'm like, I don't know if we, and so this, you know, not all robots, I think almost capitalizes on that fear, on that, just that dread of, like, because I was thinking about this going, okay, if this were our family in the future, like, I don't know if we'd want one of these robots, right? Like just because everybody else is getting one, like, doesn't mean we probably should. Did that speak to you at all?
Oh yeah. And you know what hit me was, and issue 3 in so many ways is, like, I mean, just again, like, this thing is structured so well. It's so tight. And it's in issue 3 that we first get, I think, a flashback, but it's an important thing where the kids remember the last time they saw their grandmother. And like, there's a scene of them, you know, in their hover car or whatever, going to visit her outside of the city. And they're explaining, hey, they're going to have to bubble up the cities because of all the, like, you know, unbreathable air and toxicity out here.
And militias.
You should come with us. And the grandmother makes this really conscious decision of, like, I'm not joining that technology thing. And she does it from, like, sort of an ornery perspective of, like, I'm an old lady, you know, I'm out of that, which is a thing. Like, I see my parents disenfranchised so much by technology, you know, because they didn't grow up with it, and they lack sort of the feeling that they can manipulate it the right way. So I think the grandma in many ways is like a peaceful, you know, refutation of that. Yeah. And it, you know, it made me think of all that stuff of, like, my, you know, the way my parents interact with their phones and stuff. And not, you know, they just, like, these could actually do so much more for you, Mom, if you would just pay attention or whatever. But there's another group, I think that's worth mentioning, which I think we don't meet until the 4th issue, which is, there is this group of other people who have consciously, like, decided not to go, you know, they're disenfranchised on purpose, and they are really angry about it. And so it's sort of the, you know, they are the Hell's Angels of the world, they're like the outlaws who live outside the dome cities, and, you know, so that's an interesting, like, dynamic that gets introduced later in the story. But that trying to tie it together with what you said about that feeling out of touch with tech and.
But it's it's a really important theme because it does this magic trick of making you go, okay, for most of my life, people who sort of resisted technology or refused it were almost like shamed into being like, well, you're either illiterate or you're what's that other term? It's right at the tip of my tongue. Somebody who's oh god, this is terrible. This is awful. What's the term that describes somebody who's like anti-tech? It's like they're oh Jesus Christ.
Oh, no. Yeah, I know what you're thinking of too, but it's that person. Yeah, it's the anti-tech person.
Oh my God. It's I can see the word in my head. Anyway, it's like you're there's a negative connotation associated. Luddite. Thank you. Oh my Lord. I haven't had enough coffee this morning. Yeah, it's like, well, you're just a Luddite, right? And a book like this makes you go, okay, that has been sort of that's almost like a default that needs to be overcome and go like, look, just because somebody resists technology does not make them a Luddite. There shouldn't be that instant like, well, you're just not, it's like we should start to treat those people more seriously. Like, well, what are your concerns? Interesting. Like, how do we massage that into our collective decision making and just our relationship with tech?
And I think by showing the scene with the grandmother and showing the scene now, and the creators did not harp on this too much, but showing that scene and then showing the very few scenes we get with the outlaw people. Yeah. It shows that like you can't fully, disenfranchise yourself from the culture and be healthy. It's like there really does need to be like a middle ground. Because you can't just be like a violent outlaw, or this nomad that like doesn't see your family anymore. So that is like a very real thing that we feel on Facebook. Those friends we have that can't leave Facebook, they feel like I lose all these connections, and that's a really human thing. And I know when I moved across country, that was like early days of Facebook, and I was using Facebook and I really felt like, it keeps me connected. Now, when I got off of it, I learned like, well, I don't miss that, that was not a meaningful enough part of my connection. It was through that transition, but no longer. So
if Facebook was still like, what it originally was, which is just, a place to post stuff and connect with friends. And there wasn't all this like insidious, like algorithmic stuff that was harming society.
Very true.
I'd still be on it. So like the Facebook comparison is apropos because like it's people who they know it's bad. They know it's bad for society, and yet they can't stop doing it. And it's because of that human connection. It's like, but if I stop, I lose this thing that's more that even though the bad stuff is there, this thing is more important than even the bad stuff. And I think the families who have these robots, like, look, we all know this is not a good situation. We can't stop. It's too late now. It's just that.
Yeah. Oh man.
Go ahead.
And the allegory here. No. I just love that. And the allegory, the thing I'm like bursting to say, is that they do exactly the same thing that Facebook does in the book, which is the approval rates of these industrial looking robots is like declining. People are worried about the glitch rate and everything. And they're like, you know what? Let's make it look more human.
Yep. Let's change the name.
They changed the name. They, it's like it has a face that resembles them, and they don't fear it as much. And there's a part where like the dude on the council or whatever is on a news show saying, hey, our approval rating is 100%, and that's every time Zuckerberg goes to Congress, we heard the complaints and we have fixed everything,
forevermore. Yeah. I do like, by the way, going back to something you said earlier, there isn't, none of the, there's like 5 CEOs who run all these automation companies who sort of form the new world order. And they
become the government.
Yeah. I think it's like the Council of 5 or whatever. But they didn't, like, none of them, like Elizabeth Holmes isn't standing there amongst the 5. It's people you wouldn't recognize. It's just, but at the same time, there's not like a Jeff Bezos one, right? Although there is a bald one, but there's not like a Jeff Bezos, where you're like, oh, that's who this is supposed to be. It's just kind of like, hey, in the future, these people would emerge and here's what they'd look like. But they do a great job of capturing like the Zuckerberg of it all in their personalities, and they're just just the utter flippancy in which they deal with the world that they set in motion. It just frustrated the hell out of me. I ended the series in, like, mentally mentally, intellectually, like, satiated, but just still like, damn it. It's true. It's all true. This is all accurate.
And getting back to something we touched on earlier, like, because I felt that too. And from a literary standpoint, though, it makes me want to reread the book, not see the next chapter.
Yeah.
It's like I get to that end and I'm like, oh, I want to feel that satisfaction again. So I want to start over and like have the same story, maybe not hit me the same way, but just sort of, digest it more rather than like, well, what happens to the mandroids? Like, I don't care about that, I mean, and again, I'm sure there's a way they could present that in an interesting way, but I do like that this is just this perfect capsule of like, I mean, what a capper to 2021, to just feel like,
100%.
I just, so, like I said, my faith is restored in fiction and in comic books. And because I think maybe even at the beginning of this episode, because, of our Argon tech glitch, I may have even said this at the beginning of this, where on my travels, I went through a whole bunch of books and just like, would sample them and get rid of them off my iPad because, and what I landed in was this headspace of like, I just want to read nonfiction, like graphic novels that are nonfiction. And then, so reading this, I was, not too resistant, but I didn't feel like it. And then getting into it, I was just so excited about everything in it. Yeah.
What a beautiful place to. Let's leave on that note, because that's kind of where we want everybody to be, like, coming into this book. We could talk another 3 hours about 5 single issues, because it is so jam packed. It is a limited series, not all robots, and I'm sure there will be there's definitely going to be a trade paperback, but I'm sure there will be, because it's been doing very well. It's very, very talked about, and is again an incredible talk about, like, you think about like the indie music labels of like the 60s and 70s, and like this almost feels like one of them having like their big hit, right? Like, this is AWA Studios going, this is one of our flagship titles now, and just Mark Russell. I'm going to be, anytime Mark Russell's name comes up in anything, I'm instantly going to check it out, because he's 2 for 2 solidly.
Just what a surprise hit for all of that, like, I don't know, just seeing his name for me and not recognizing it from anything, and him having the same name as like a guy that wrote political parody songs and stuff. I was like, what is, like, who is this guy? Why do I care what he has to say? And just to be so delighted by everything, and the artwork too.
Oh yeah, and I do want to do one more shout out. Art by Mike Deodato Jr., color by Lee Luffridge, and then covers by Rahzzah. Just, a killer team all around.
Oh yeah.
AWA should be proud as hell about this. They're on my radar now too as a publisher. Like, they, Boom really ascended recently, and I think AWA is about to have a similar pop. I can't say enough about Not All Robots.
Yeah, just to shout out AWA too, it does seem like I had seen in Mike Deodato's statement at the end of issue 1 that he shouts out his editor, Axel Alonso. And in my head, I was like, I'm pretty sure that guy was at Marvel. And when I go to the AWA website, it does look like Axel was Marvel's editor-in-chief and then founded AWA, and the AWA stands for Artists, Writers, Artisans. Yep. So it sounds like it's a real creator-focused company. I'm just, they do have a film and TV section, so for what that's worth, but I'm hoping Not All Robots just stays in its perfect packaging right here, and we don't get an animated series or something.
Oh God, 100%. Oh geez. Yeah, no, we have whole episodes talking about, like, the appropriate use of stories, and like when a comic should stay a comic. And this is 100% one of those, like Alan Moore, like, it should never be adapted. Just leave it as this. Netflix, keep your hands off it. Well, anyway, if you liked our review, if you want to go back, our back catalog has a ton of episodes where we talk about books and comics and culture and movies and everything else. You can find all of that at panelism.inc. That's panelism.ink. And we're also that same handle on Instagram, panelism.inc. And this, I think we've mentioned this before between the two of us, but this book really set a fire under me for comics this year. And I feel like it's a omen of things to come. I think, I feel like some of the books I'm reading, including this one, are at a level that reminds me a lot of 2015 when I really got back into comics hardcore. It's just like everything is firing really nicely. So I can't wait to talk about more books like this.
God, I'm glad you said that, because that I hadn't put it in those terms, but that's exactly what I'm looking for. I think we did a great job through the lockdown year of talking regularly, doing shows regularly, but we were like all over the map. Mm-hmm. And then I think during 2021, that was when sort of the impact hit me of like, man, I just want to go outside. I don't want to read. And what I was looking for was like, what is that spark? What's that thing that like... So what a kickoff to 2022. I'm so happy we did this. Thank you for suggesting it. This is an awesome book.
Yeah. Well, we'll be back soon, maybe next week, with another episode. We'll have another book, I'm sure, to talk about and more. So thanks for listening. It's been fun. I'll catch you later, sir.
All right. I'll see you then, or I will see you at another time.